Well, hello, brothers and sisters. All right, so last week we started on the seventh beatitude, which is um, based on it was when Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." So last week I offered kind of an way to introduce the topic of peacemakers by asking the question, "What does the world need to see?" And I identified from about six different passages in the New Testament, these passages that draw specific attention to the Christian's conduct behavior as perceived and recognized by the world. God is very concerned that we be aware of and understand how powerful and important and significant is the influence we can make in the world with people that are, quote, in the world. So, the world, we gave several examples. The world is filled with sin, with corruption, with all the things that are hallmarks of the way that the world operates, how it normalizes evil, makes evil normal, how it glories in things that are evil and wrong, and all these other different kinds of things, and tried to show that in all these instances, the world needs to see something profoundly different. And that way that is profoundly different is the way of Christ. And God's purpose and plan is to allow his people, the church, to be the ones who put that on display. It's not the Bible as the Bible alone that works in God's purposes. What fulfills and completes the purpose of God in the world is God's people living out the reality of the gospel. And that's part of God's purpose and plan. So we're going to continue with this theme of blessed are the peacemakers. And I just want to begin with this observation, just in light of the ongoing realities that we've been living in our nation, not just in the past few weeks, in the past year, and really even beyond that. So let me just make this observation that I believe is absolutely indisputable, and that is that our nation is overcome with fear, anger, and hatred. I may develop this theme later on and explore these three vices that grip the human soul and destroy our lives. But there's an intimate connection. There's a diabolical. That means it's from the devil. There's a diabolical connection between fear and anger and hatred, and they all latch on and give birth and grow and intensify as each one, if you will, feeds upon the other. So let me briefly explain. Let's begin with fear. In fear, we're perceiving something, whether it's real or not. Sometimes in fear, we perceive a threat that isn't a real threat. We believe something that's a lie, something that's not true, and then we get filled with fear. So somebody says, that person over there is mad at you and they're going to go beat you up. Um, well, you can be filled with a lot of fear and insecurity, but the truth is that that was a lie. Sometimes your fears are legitimate because there really is something that is a threat to you and to your well being. So, fear is always about whether it's perceived or not, whether it's real or a delusion. Fear is always about seeing things that are posed as a threat to you, a threat to your well being, a threat to your safety, a threat to your security, a threat to your well being and your happiness. Okay? That's where fear has its place. Now, that's where fear comes from. Now, that doesn't mean that every dimension of fear is wrong or sinful. Fear, like all these emotions, is something that there is a limited, constrained way that we can have these emotions. Humans' problems, however, is we don't know how to handle these emotions well, and that's why we cannot allow them to really take root in our lives much at all. So with fear then comes anger. So something's a perceived threat. Anger, basically there's two ways that we respond to a threat. It's called the flight or fight response, right? And that really is true. If you see something as a threat, you'll either run from it because you believe that that's how you can protect yourself from it is by running away or avoiding it altogether, or you fight it. And anger is an emotion that is aggressive, right? It, it supercharges us physiologically and emotionally and readies us for fight and for conflict. Okay, it's hard to beat somebody up and not be angry. You have to almost get yourself mad and angry in order to go after someone that you feel is a threat to you. But anger, again, there is a very limited, specific way that anger can be expressed, but human beings don't do anger well at all. Um, I know I don't do anger well at all. That's why you never say anything and never make any decisions about anything ever when you're in the state of anger. And so many things have happened tragically because people had had no control of their anger. And then the final stage of this development in destroying the soul is hatred. And this is where it comes to its full fruition and where the soul really becomes destroyed because now the soul is reaching a state where it chooses the antithesis of everything we were made for, which is to walk in love, and that is to hate, to will evil upon those that you are afraid of as a threat to you and who are making you angry, and then you're filled with hatred. Now, brothers and sisters, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out this is what is unfolding in our nation, and it's been brewing and stewing for decades. For decades. This has been the seeds and the ideas and the ideologies and all these other things are fomenting. And now American citizens are afraid of other American citizens, their beliefs. They believe they're a genuine threat to their well-being, whether it's perceived to be real or not. And in some cases, it's real. In some cases, it's not. And now they're filled with anger. They feel aggression towards those people who they believe are a threat to them. And then that degenerates finally into a form of hatred and contempt. Okay? Now, I hope and I trust that all of us have enough decent sense and understanding and a commitment to biblical truth that we can understand that these three things are enemies of the soul. And it doesn't make any difference how righteous you believe your cause is. It doesn't even make any difference how righteous your cause actually is. If you, in the defense of something that you believe is true and good and right, are being overcome with those three things, it doesn't mean you have to give up what you believe, but you need to check yourself. And that's part of the challenge and the problem. It's how anger works, for example. A lot of people are angry at people for having done them wrong. So think about this. Lots of times we get angry because we don't get our way, but sometimes we get angry because people really did do us wrong. And there is a real, legitimate, and appropriate place for anger to be present when we have been wronged by someone else or when someone else wrongs somebody that we love and care about. But even in that situation, Paul says in Ephesians 4, do not let the sun go down on your anger. And if you do, he says, and don't give the devil a foothold. You can't allow that anger. Even though it's a righteous anger, you can allow it to stew and fester, and your righteous anger now is turning around and eating up and destroying you. Brothers and sisters, your soul is the most valuable thing in the universe. You can't afford to let these things, we can't afford as God's people to let these things overwhelm us. So left unchecked, fear, anger, and hatred destroy lives. They destroy families. They destroy churches. And they destroy nations. History irrefutably demonstrate that. So only real peace can help to remedy this reality, this trifecta of anger, fear and anger and hatred. And I think these are very telling things to reflect upon. And given the atmosphere of fear, hatred, and anger that surrounds our culture, what we need are peacemakers. We need peacemakers. And I want to explore that because I know for some of us that's, oh, so you want me to compromise the truth? You want me to go along with things that are wrong? Well, of course not. That's not peacemaking. Peacemaking is not, yes, you're doing what's evil, but we'll just, for the sake of getting along, we'll just ignore evil or ignore what's false and ignore what is a lie. But you can hold to those things and still be and seek to be a peacemaker. So there's much to explore here where peacemaking is concerned, okay? So all of the Beatitudes thus far, they pronounce God's blessing on a certain state or a condition of the heart. So poor in spirit, the meek, the pure in heart. Every one of those up to this point have been, what is the state of your inner soul? What is the state of your heart? This seventh beatitude is a different one because it doesn't speak of a condition of heart, but it speaks of an activity. It speaks of something you do. So this one speaks of a specific activity we are called to engage in as citizens of the kingdom, and that is to be peacemakers. And this call to be peacemakers is specifically addressed to you and me as citizens in the kingdom of God. It's not addressed, I want to be sure, I'm just going to say it the right way. This is not addressed to world leaders, although we would want world leaders to be peacemakers, or politicians, although we would want politicians and people in authority to be peacemakers. I'm not denying that part. I just want to stress to you that Jesus is addressing us, citizens in his kingdom, and saying you are being called to be peacemakers in a world that doesn't know peace. You are, by virtue of your living and your being, are to model peace and the ability to help accomplish and achieve and realize peace in the midst of conflict and hatred and other things of this nature. So that's your calling. What it means to be in the kingdom is you're called to be a peacemaker. And that means that you cannot be filled with fear, and you cannot be filled with anger, and you cannot be filled with hatred. If those are things that are overtaking your soul and your life, whatever the reasons may be, political or otherwise, it doesn't make any difference if it's political or not. If you're being overcome with that, you can't be a peacemaker because you're not at peace. It's kind of strange. It'd be like if I had a reputation for being disruptive and divisive and causing all kinds of trouble and difficulties among people, and then all of a sudden I wanted to intervene and try to help two people get along with each other and reprimand both of them for not learning how to get along. That doesn't make a lot of sense. The only reason why we can be peacemakers in a unique way is because we have discovered, and I'll explore this uh, beginning next week, but is because we have found genuine peace with God. We have something that though the whole world around us be destroyed, we are at peace. And you know, when the world falls apart and you are peaceful and you are content and you are living in hope and promise and you're enduring injustice with grace and with dignity, when you do those kinds of things, the world takes notice of that. The world will take notice of that. That's what the world needs to see. All right, so I'm just going to talk today about peace. I'm just going to offer some conceptual ideas, some basic understandings about the term peace. That's all I'm going to do today. I'm already going to take enough time already, and you know how notorious I can be about that. So let's just think about the word peace today. So first of all, when we speak of peace, it's understandable that the way we're going to try to define peace and the way that we normally think of peace is that peace is the opposite of war, right? So Leo Tolstoy's classic novel, War and Peace. Okay. History basically is the history of war and peace, and most of the history is war. There's very little peace. Okay? Very little peace in the history of the world. So, peace, however, is not merely absence of conflict, strife, or enmity. Um, we usually think of peace as the opposite of war, but we have to think of peace as something that is um, positive and good in and of itself. Now, in other words, we don't in other words, we don't understand what peace is by first understanding what conflict is. Conflict is the aberration of the original good, which is called peace. And this is a very important theme that runs throughout the Bible, because the Bible says the world was created and founded by the God of peace and of order and of harmony. So here's a word that you may have heard. It's the Hebrew word shalom, um, which in its ancient origins refers to, and it has a rather rich translation and a rich meaning, but one of the ways in which shalom can be understood and rendered in the Hebrew language of the Old Testament is the idea of peace. But although it says shalom conveys peace, it's important that you understand what that peace means. How is peace positively described by the word shalom? And what that word shalom means is harmony and order. So shalom, peace, means harmony and order. All things functioning as God has ordained them to be. So peace means you have two or more things. Let me just try to get real general here. You have two or more things that are designed to be together, that are designed to cooperate and to work together. Okay? Um, so they're two different things. And so, therefore, because they need to work together, they have to cooperate together. There's a sense in which each has to understand their place and their role and what they do, and then they work together to accomplish that particular role. So if you think about an old wind-up watch, when you had all the gears and all the springs, sometimes those little timepieces had hundreds of little teeny tiny moving parts, all those springs and all those gears moving around. Well, each one of those gears and each one of those springs has a specific function in place in the overall design of that watch. It's kind of like if you take something apart and you put it back together and there's two or three pieces missing, and you go, oh, well, it'll still be fine. Well, no, it won't be fine, because those parts were all there for a reason. They served a function and a purpose. So each one of those parts has to play its role, but each one of those parts has to play its role together. Okay? Each has to play its role together. So if one of those wheels or one of those springs or one of those gears in that watch has a chip or a crack in it, and one of the teeth on one of the wheels is broken off, that single little variance upsets the harmony and the order, and the watch may no longer be able to do what it was designed to do. Okay? So um, God creates a universe of harmony and order, and that's what I want you to try to envision what peace looks like. Peace is all these different things, all depending upon and needing one another, but working together with one another to accomplish some higher end and higher goal. So, when you think about the Genesis account of creation, when you read the Genesis account of creation in Genesis 1, what is God doing? Well, God is giving everything a function, right? Let there be this, let there be land, let there be vegetation, let there be birds, let them do this, let this happen. Every single thing that God is doing is He is establishing the order of the universe. He is giving order to the universe. Each thing has its place, and each thing has its purpose that it is designed to fulfill. So, again, think of a simple illustration with the solar system. The solar system, we have the sun, the largest mass, with the largest amount of mass, and then you have all the planets, including the Earth, that are held together and spin around the Earth because of the gravitational force of the sun. Well, all the planets are dependent upon the presence of the sun, and their distance from the sun determines the path and the order by which they rotate around the sun. When we landed men on the moon, we landed them on the moon within feet of the target on the moon. How did we do that? Because there was such precise order and harmony that God ordains in all things, okay? So that's the big thing. Peace, you have to think about order and harmony, okay? So, peace is a positive and good state, but there is much to be done to ensure that this peace remains. And that's the key thing. Sometimes all it takes is for one part to fail in its function to cause the whole thing to become disordered. Okay? Sometimes all it takes is one little thing to cause the entire thing to immediately unravel and fall apart. There was a tragic airplane accident about 30 years ago. And long story short, the pilot made a very heroic crash landing out in a cornfield in Kansas. And many of the passengers survived. There were some who tragically lost their life. So, long story short, when they tried to determine what the cause of the crash was, it was discovered that in one of the turbine blades, these are the blades that turn inside the jet engines that creates the thrust and the power of the engine, that in one of those blades, there was discovered a microscopic little flaw in the metal. And that little teeny flaw in the metal, over the course of, I think it was more than 10 years that that plane was flying, but that small little tiny microscopic flaw that you would think could never bring an airplane down, it eventually, over time, with the pressure and the years of use, it caused a split and a crack in that turbine. The turbine flew off and it sliced the all of the mechanical or the hydraulic lines to the airplane. So they had absolutely no hydraulic control over the airplane. So there's an example of one little teeny tiny thing. It was as small as a speck of sand, they said. That little flaw disrupted the entire order of that massive airplane. And in the world around us, in human relations, all it takes is just one person can do something that has this tragic cascading effect that affects everything and everyone else, because everything else is connected. It's like a mobile, right? We remember making some mobiles when I was in grade school. So you got a little coat hanger, and you have all these different items hanging down from the string. Well, if you touch one thing on that mobile, it doesn't just move the one thing; it moves everything. Everything becomes affected by it. Okay. So sometimes all it takes is for one part to fail in its function to cause the whole thing to become disordered. Because of sin, violence, hate, anger, and destruction are now largely the norm in our world. That's the point that we need to understand. What is normative in the human relations is not peace. Peace tragically becomes the exception rather than the rule. I am told that if you look at, I don't know if it's world history or maybe just Western history. I believe it's world history, but if you look at world history over the last 2,000 years, there's only been a total of about less than 100 years where there was absolute peace in the world, meaning there were no wars. So almost every year of human history is a record of war and conflict and hatred and violence going on in the world. And of course, peace has all different other, a lack of peace has so many other different forms of expression that go far beyond, armed combat. Okay. So peace often hangs on a razor thin edge. Civilization hangs on a razor thin edge. We think that because we have law enforcement and we have laws and rules and a constitution and all these things will keep everybody in order. But actually, what keeps us in order are the unspoken laws, if you will, the laws written in the human heart, inscribed within us because of our humanity and our being made in the image and likeness of God. And when that is disregarded, all of the efforts, all the human laws and all the rules and all the regulations, all the things that maintain the order of a society, they begin to fall apart and crash. And I believe that there are very disconcerting signs that this has been unfolding in our culture and uh, will probably continue to do so. So let's conclude with this observation. Peace has its origin in God and being in harmony with God. This is the biblical, the fundamental biblical wisdom we need to see. God is the author of all peace. When all things and all people, when all of the creation is acting as God ordains, then there is peace and there is harmony. So again, I like to use the planets as an example. The sun, the moon, and the planets don't decide that they're going to leave their orbits. They don't decide they're going to slow down and well, they may slow down slightly because of gravitational issues, but the moon doesn't decide I'm not gonna orbit on the Earth anymore. I'm going to get out of my path because they all are moving as God ordained them to move. There is peace and there is harmony. There's no conflict going on because everything's in harmony with God's will. But when God created angels, the higher beings, and then God created human beings, He endowed them with the ability to choose, to make choices. And some angels chose against God, and some human beings chose against God as well, and that brought disorder into God's creation, a disorder that we live with to this very day. So sin disrupts our fellowship with God and robs us of the divine peace we were made to enjoy. And from this inner reality of a lack of peace results the outer reality of violence, hatred, war, and disorder. So the most important thing that we need to have in this discussion about being peacemakers is that we need to have peace between us and God and to experience and to know peace with God. As Paul says in Philippians 4, a peace which passes understanding. And when you and I have that peace that the world can never destroy and the world can never take away, then though the world fall apart, we still have peace. Okay? It's like Jesus saying, your joy, he says this in John 15 and 16, your joy and your peace, no one will be able to take it away from you. No one will be able to rob you of that. So let's be sure that if our hearts are unsettled, if our hearts are not at peace, if we are being too overcome with fear and with anger and hatred, there are many things that we can proactively do to reduce that happening in our life. And I've talked about some of those things before, but let's just understand it all starts with being at peace with God and resting assured that that peace is something no one can ever take from you. So next week we will explore more about the concept of being peacemakers, what the peace of God is like, and how it translates into being peacemakers for the Lord. Thank you for your time and God's grace and peace.